What if the janitor you walked past every day was actually your boss? In the heart of San Francisco, nestled among tech giants and towering skyscrapers, Greenwood and Associates was a consulting powerhouse, until everything changed. Meet Rachel Evans, a quiet woman in a navy blue uniform who mopped floors and emptied trash without a word. But what the arrogant CEO and his inner circle didn't know was that Rachel wasn't just a cleaner, she was the original founder and majority owner of the entire company. When CEO Liam Carter began harassing her, assuming she was powerless, he had no idea he was sealing his own fate. Rachel endured his toxic remarks, his threats, and even an unsettling late-night confrontation in the parking garage, all while building her case. But the moment she walked back into the boardroom in a tailored suit, everything changed. Stay with us to see how Rachel takes back her company, and justice. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment about what part shocked you the most. Rachel Evans's day began long before the first coffee pot sputtered to life in the Greenwood and Associates break room. It was barely 5:30 a.m. when she slipped through the employee entrance in the back of the building, pushing her cleaning cart with practiced ease. The morning air in San Francisco was cool and damp, clinging to the stone sidewalks outside the towering headquarters of one of the West Coast's most prestigious consulting firms. Inside, the offices were silent, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional squeak of her mop gliding across the marble floor. To anyone watching, Rachel was just another janitor, middle-aged, quiet, hair pulled into a simple bun beneath a navy cap, wearing the standard-issue uniform with her name embroidered above the pocket. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't speak unless spoken to. And in this building filled with Ivy League degrees and six-figure salaries, she was invisible. That was exactly how she wanted it. But Rachel Evans was no ordinary janitor. She was the original founder and majority shareholder of Greenwood and Associates, a firm she had built from scratch with her late husband over 2 decades ago. After his passing and a health scare of her own, Rachel had handed over day-to-day operations to her cousin, Luke Evans, who was listed as CEO on paper. Quietly, she had stepped into the background, confident Luke would uphold the values she and her husband had cherished: respect, fairness, and service to clients and employees alike. But over the years, whispers had reached her ears, about a cultural shift, about growing arrogance among upper management, and about how support staff were being mistreated, belittled, even harassed. She had to see it with her own eyes. So she returned. Not as the founder. Not as the boss. But as a cleaner. For 3 weeks, Rachel moved through the corridors of the 26th floor and the executive suites on 27, listening more than she spoke. She overheard snide remarks from consultants fresh out of business school. She saw junior analysts working 70-hour weeks, afraid to breathe wrong in front of their bosses. But the worst offender, by far, was Liam Carter. Liam was the firm's current CEO, tall and well-dressed, with a $1,200 watch on his wrist and a smirk permanently etched onto his face. He was charming when it suited him and ruthless when it didn't. Rachel watched as he barked at interns, mocked receptionists, and made a show of walking right past janitors as if they were fixtures on the wall. He carried himself like a king in a castle built by others. She watched him closely, how he flattered clients, humiliated underlings, and treated his power like a game. Monica Hayes, the chief strategy officer, was his right hand. Sharp-tongued and equally self-important, she rolled her eyes at assistants, snapped at the accounting staff, and once loudly asked why janitors were even allowed on executive floors during meetings. Rachel never reacted. She simply nodded, cleaned, and waited. But she never forgot. Then came the turning point. It was a Monday morning, fog curling through the streets outside as Rachel mopped the hall near Liam's office. He exited suddenly, startled to see her so close. Instead of stepping around her or excusing himself, he stopped and smirked. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing at an already spotless section of floor. "You know, for someone who spends so much time cleaning, you'd think you'd be better at it." Rachel stood up slowly, locking eyes with him briefly before looking down again. "I'll take care of it," she replied evenly. But he didn't walk away. "You know," he added, his voice dropping into something more personal, "it's a shame. A woman like you, with your looks, wasting away pushing a mop. Maybe I could find you something better here, something more fitting." Rachel's blood turned cold. She had expected arrogance. She hadn't expected this. She gave him a tight, professional smile. "I'm happy where I am, thank you," she said. Liam chuckled and walked away, but from that moment on, the tension grew. He lingered too long when passing by. He made comments that were barely veiled. He blocked her path in the hall once, laughing when she tried to step around him. Then, late one evening, everything boiled over. Rachel had stayed late to finish polishing the brass rails in the executive lobby. The building was quiet. Most staff had left. She was wheeling her cart toward the parking garage when Liam appeared, alone. "Well, look who's working overtime," he said with a predatory grin. Rachel kept walking, keeping her eyes forward, but he stepped in front of her, too close. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "Someone like you could really get ahead in this company if she knew how to play the game. I could help you. You just have to be cooperative." Rachel's grip on her cart tightened. She could smell his cologne, could feel the heat of his breath near her face. "And if I'm not?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. He leaned in even closer. "Then you'll be out on the street. You think anyone else is hiring someone like you? You're lucky I even noticed." Rachel stepped back and looked him squarely in the eyes. "Liam," she said, her voice turning sharp, "you have no idea who you're talking to. But you're about to find out." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her heart racing, but her resolve solid as steel. The next morning, the Greenwood office buzzed with its usual energy, consultants sipping espresso, assistants typing furiously, Monica barking orders over speakerphone. Then Rachel walked through the front entrance, not in a janitor's uniform, but in a tailored charcoal gray suit. Her hair was styled, her stride confident. She bypassed security, took the elevator to the top floor, and walked straight into the boardroom where the weekly leadership meeting was about to begin. Luke Evans was already there. When he saw her, he stood with a proud smile. "Everyone," he said, turning to the stunned faces around the table, "I'd like to introduce the founder and majority shareholder of Greenwood and Associates. Rachel Evans." Gasps. A coffee cup clattered to the table. Liam went pale. "You," he choked. "You've been the janitor?" Rachel gave him a cool look. "No, Liam. I've been the owner. And I've been watching." Then, calmly and without raising her voice, she laid out everything she had observed. The bullying. The power trips. The inappropriate behavior. She named names. She quoted exact remarks. And when she reached Liam's actions, she paused. "You harassed me," she said, her voice steady. "You used your position to intimidate. You threatened someone you believed couldn't fight back. But you were wrong." She turned to security, who had entered the room quietly. "Effective immediately, you're fired," she said to Liam. "And legal action will follow." Liam's face twisted in disbelief. "You can't do this." Rachel didn't flinch. "I already did." He was escorted out, his expensive shoes echoing on the marble floors. Monica followed shortly after, along with several others whose conduct had failed to meet basic human decency. The rest of the team sat in stunned silence. Rachel stood at the head of the table, looking at them, not with contempt, but with determination. This company was built on hard work, fairness, and respect. And that's what it's going to stand for again. If you're with me, we rebuild together. If not, there's the door. The silence gave way to cautious applause. Later that afternoon, Rachel sat in her old office, now her own once more, looking out at the Bay Bridge glinting in the sunlight. The road ahead would be long. Cleaning up the culture of a company takes more than one dramatic moment. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. Greenwood and Associates wasn't just a firm. It was her legacy. And she had reclaimed it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Luke: "We're in this together. Let's rebuild." Rachel smiled. The storm had passed. But the rebuilding had just begun. The fallout from Liam Carter's dismissal was immediate and seismic. Word spread like wildfire through the halls of Greenwood and Associates. Rachel Evans, the quiet janitor, had been the founder and majority owner all along. Staff whispered in break rooms, stunned and curious, as executives scrambled to process what had just happened. Some were relieved. Others were terrified. But all of them now understood one thing: things were going to change. Rachel wasted no time. That same day, she and Luke held a mandatory all-staff meeting in the 15th floor auditorium, a large, sunlit room usually reserved for client presentations. Rows of employees filled the seats: consultants, administrative assistants, analysts, support staff, and yes, even the janitorial crew. Rachel stood at the front in a navy blazer, her presence calm yet commanding. "I know you have questions," she began. "And you deserve answers." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I stepped away from Greenwood several years ago for health reasons. I trusted that the company would remain grounded in the principles we built it on: dignity, hard work, and accountability. But over time, I began hearing things, stories about mistreatment, about fear, about leaders forgetting who actually keeps this company running." She scanned the room, eyes meeting faces both surprised and ashamed. "So I came back. Not through the front door. Not with a title. But quietly, as a janitor. I wanted to see the truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even those who had never paid her much mind now looked at her with a mix of respect and unease. "I saw good people working hard without recognition. I saw toxic behavior tolerated at the top. And I saw some of you, too many of you, being treated like you didn't matter." Rachel's voice grew firmer. "That ends today." She laid out a plan for the company's new direction: mandatory ethics and leadership training, a whistleblower hotline directly reporting to her office, quarterly employee surveys, and, for the first time in the firm's history, a leadership review board that included representatives from every department, not just executives. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Rachel wasn't just reclaiming Greenwood's image, she was rebuilding its soul. That evening, Rachel sat with Luke in the founder's suite overlooking the Embarcadero. The skyline shimmered in the twilight, and the buzz of a reinvigorated company vibrated through the floor beneath them. "You handled today like a pro," Luke said, handing her a cup of peppermint tea. Rachel smiled faintly. "I didn't realize how much I missed this place, until I saw how far it had fallen." Luke nodded solemnly. "You think they'll stick around? The employees?" "Most will," Rachel said. "The ones who believe in change. The others, will show them the door." Over the next several days, Rachel moved through the building not as a figurehead but as a working leader. She visited every department: tech, marketing, finance, human resources, and sat down with staff at every level. She asked about their roles, their frustrations, and what they would change if given the chance. She met Carla, a single mom who worked in the billing department and hadn't had a raise in 4 years despite stellar reviews. She spoke with Eric, a junior consultant who admitted he was afraid to speak up during meetings because Liam used to mock people in front of clients. She listened. She took notes. And she followed up. Rachel also reconnected with people who had been with Greenwood from the beginning, old hands who remembered when the office still had linoleum floors and no espresso machine. They were loyal, but they had grown disillusioned. Her return sparked a cautious optimism. Still, not everyone welcomed the change. Monica Hayes, though fired, hadn't gone quietly. She'd threatened legal action on her way out and had already contacted a few of Greenwood's competitors. Rachel expected some PR fallout, but she wasn't worried. Transparency would be their armor. To get ahead of the narrative, Rachel recorded a video message for Greenwood's website and clients. In it, she explained the leadership transition, acknowledged the company's recent cultural issues, and reaffirmed their commitment to integrity and partnership. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several long-term clients even sent personal emails applauding her courage and vision. But rebuilding from the inside required more than vision, it needed structure. Rachel reinstated the company's original mentorship program, pairing junior staff with seasoned professionals. She also introduced Ground Floor Fridays, where once a month, executives would shadow employees in non-management roles, from IT support to reception to janitorial services. It wasn't a stunt. It was a reminder, everyone matters. Meanwhile, HR began conducting confidential interviews with staff who had reported feeling unsafe or unheard under the previous leadership. What emerged was a pattern of intimidation and unchecked arrogance, mostly concentrated among a handful of mid-level managers Liam had promoted. Rachel reviewed each case personally. Those found complicit in the toxicity were let go with no fanfare. Among them was Brent Wallace, a senior operations manager who had once told a female colleague that she should smile more if she wanted to be taken seriously. Another was Stephanie Chu, a high-ranking analyst who had been caught belittling interns and sabotaging their performance reviews. The message was clear: talent was no excuse for cruelty. But it wasn't all housecleaning. Rachel also recognized excellence. She gave promotions to longtime employees who had been quietly doing exceptional work for years. People like Marcus Hill, the overnight security guard, who had once stopped a data breach in its tracks by alerting IT to suspicious access at 2 a.m. Or Jasmine Rivera, a project manager known for mentoring every intern who passed through her department, without ever being asked. For the first time in years, Greenwood began to feel like a family again. At the 1-month mark, Rachel called another all-hands meeting, this time not in crisis, but in celebration. The office buzzed with a new energy. The janitors were no longer ghostly figures who came and went in silence, they were part of the team. Receptionists were invited to strategy meetings. And during the meeting, Rachel made a surprising announcement: Greenwood would be launching a new community initiative focused on providing career pathways for overlooked talent, veterans, formerly incarcerated individuals, and those without traditional degrees. "We built this company with grit and grace," she said. "Now it's time to extend that opportunity to others." The employees rose in a standing ovation. Later that night, Rachel found herself alone in the Founders Lounge, a space she hadn't entered in years. The room still smelled faintly of mahogany and lavender. On the wall hung a framed photo of her and her late husband, back when Greenwood operated out of a one-bedroom apartment in Oakland. He wore a baseball cap. She held a baby in one arm and a client pitch in the other. "You'd like what we're doing now," she murmured. There was still much to do. Some of the firm's financials needed rebalancing after severance packages and new initiatives. Recruiting for open leadership positions had to be strategic and values-driven. And Rachel knew that trust, though building again, was fragile. But she had time. And she had purpose. The next morning, she arrived at the office at 6 a.m. The cleaning crew was already there. This time, instead of avoiding eye contact, everyone greeted her warmly. Rachel stopped to help one of them, an older man named George, lift a box of cleaning supplies. "You don't have to do that, Ms. Evans," he said. "Call me Rachel," she replied, smiling. "And yes, I do." They laughed, and as they moved down the hallway together, a junior analyst walking by paused to hold the door open for both of them. Things were different now. And the best was yet to come. As Greenwood and Associates began to stabilize under Rachel Evans's renewed leadership, a different kind of challenge emerged, one not rooted in policy or process, but in perception. While the internal culture was healing, the outside world had taken notice of the shake-up, and not all attention was positive. Within days of Liam Carter and Monica Hayes's departure, industry blogs, and business news sites had begun speculating about the sudden leadership shift. Power vacuum at Greenwood, read one headline. Founder returns after years in the shadows. What's really going on? Asked another. Rachel expected this. In fact, she had prepared for it. But she hadn't anticipated how many people within the company were still loyal to the old regime, quietly, privately, and in some cases, dangerously. It started with a few unusual IT flags, confidential client files being accessed at odd hours. Then, Rachel received an anonymous email suggesting that someone in the upper middle management tier was leaking sensitive data to a competitor. The message was vague, unsigned, and sent through a masked address. Still, it was enough to raise alarms. Rachel called an emergency meeting with Luke and the heads of compliance and cybersecurity. Together, they initiated a quiet investigation. Not a public witch hunt, Rachel refused to return to the culture of fear Liam had cultivated, but a thorough, discreet inquiry that left no digital footprint unexamined. In the meantime, Rachel continued her listening tour, meeting with staff and joining department meetings unannounced. She wanted people to know that leadership was no longer behind closed doors. It was present. Accessible. Accountable. During one such visit to the Strategic Initiatives team, she noticed a shift in energy as she walked into the room. The conversation died quickly, and 3 team members, one of whom, Devin Marks, had been recruited by Monica, looked especially uneasy. Later that day, Luke confirmed her suspicion. Devin had been one of Liam's most trusted lieutenants. He'd flown under the radar during the initial review because his behavior had never crossed HR lines, but he had influence. Quiet influence. Dangerous influence. Rachel decided to confront it head-on. She scheduled a one-on-one with Devin in her office. When he arrived, he was cool and confident, dressed in a crisp shirt and designer shoes. He didn't look nervous. That, in itself, told her everything. Devin, she began, offering him a seat across from her. I'll be direct. I believe you've been in communication with external parties about internal operations. Is that true? Devin's smile didn't waver. That's a strong accusation, Rachel. It's not an accusation, she said. It's an observation based on behavior patterns and access logs. I see, he said, leaning back. And if I were to admit I'd had conversations, would that be grounds for termination? Depends on the content of those conversations, she replied calmly. But more importantly, it speaks to loyalty. Are you here to build Greenwood, or to break it down from the inside? Devin was silent for a moment. Then he shrugged. I was here when this place actually thrived. Liam got results. You may not have liked his style, but he made us competitive. Now, you're turning us into a charity project. Rachel stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city before turning back to face him. You know what's interesting, Devin? I've heard this same logic before, from men in boardrooms who measured success only in dollars and quarterly graphs. But Greenwood was never just about results. We built this company to be great and good. You forgot the second part. Devin scoffed. With all due respect, Rachel, good doesn't pay the bills. And yet here we are, more profitable than ever, with contracts pending from 3 new Fortune 500 companies because they like our new direction, she said. Turns out, decency is good business. She paused, then added, you have a choice, Devin. Align with our values, or step aside. There was no immediate answer, just a clenched jaw and a flash of resentment. Devin rose without a word and left her office. That evening, Rachel reviewed the investigation report. The evidence was damning. It was Devin who had been leaking data, anonymously forwarding reports to a rival firm Monica had started consulting for. The next morning, Rachel dismissed him, citing cause. She also sent a company-wide memo reiterating Greenwood's new code of ethics and digital security standards. But that incident sparked something deeper in Rachel. She realized that rooting out corruption wasn't just about finding bad actors. It was about empowering good ones. It was about building a foundation strong enough that no one person could shake it again. So she launched a new initiative, the Greenwood Ethics Council. Made up of volunteers from every level, interns to department heads, the council would meet monthly to review practices, recommend policy updates, and even mediate disputes. It wasn't performative. It had teeth. Rachel granted it the authority to escalate matters directly to the executive team. The council quickly became a beloved fixture within the firm. Staff began sharing stories of past injustices, not for vengeance, but for awareness. A marketing assistant revealed how she'd been pressured to stay late without pay. An IT specialist admitted he'd covered for a manager's mistake out of fear. These confessions became a kind of cultural reckoning. Rachel sat in on the first few sessions, listening quietly as the team spoke. She didn't lead. She didn't dominate. She simply learned. And from that learning, new policies were born: mandatory overtime compensation, transparent promotion criteria, and a formal mentorship ladder that allowed junior employees to set career goals and receive support to meet them. As trust deepened, so did the work. Greenwood began to take on more pro bono consulting projects for nonprofits and local governments. Under Rachel's leadership, the company launched a 6-month pilot program mentoring minority-owned startups in the Bay Area, offering strategic planning at no cost. Employees were invited to volunteer hours, and participation was overwhelming. Meanwhile, the company's reputation began to shift in the broader industry. Publications that had once questioned Rachel's return now praised her for her transparency, reform, and results. A feature in Forbes Women highlighted Greenwood's rise as a model for ethical corporate leadership. Clients who had quietly observed the changes began referring others. The firm's growth didn't just rebound, it surpassed expectations. But the most meaningful transformation wasn't found in the numbers. It was in the way people looked at each other in the hallways. The way interns spoke up in meetings without fear. The way janitors were greeted by name every morning. The way a receptionist named Sandra was nominated for Employee of the Month, and won, not because she made the most money, but because she made everyone feel welcome. Rachel noticed. One morning, she arrived early and found George, the veteran janitor, struggling to carry a new box of supplies. She helped him lift it onto the cart and asked how things were going. He looked at her and smiled. "Been working in buildings like this for 25 years, ma'am. Never once did the CEO carry a mop with me. I tell my grandkids about you." Rachel chuckled, patting his shoulder. "You tell them it takes a village." He nodded. "Yeah. But it takes a real leader to remind folks that the village matters." Later that week, Rachel hosted an open Q&A in the lobby, a casual event she called Coffee with the Founder. No sign-up, no agenda. Just an open mic and fresh donuts. Dozens showed up. One young employee asked her, "What's been the hardest part of coming back?" Rachel paused. "Honestly," she said. "Watching how easily people can forget what matters when no one's watching. And realizing how long it had been since I was watching. But the beauty of rock bottom is that it gives you a solid place to rebuild." The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then everyone. As the applause died down, Rachel smiled. Greenwood had changed. And so had she. This was no longer just a comeback story. It was a resurrection, with roots deeper, stronger, and more grounded than ever before. Spring settled over San Francisco with a warmth that filtered through the tall glass windows of Greenwood and Associates, softening the steel edges of the firm's high-powered world. But while the sunlight brought an air of new beginnings, Rachel Evans knew the most important work still lay ahead, not just reforming policies or repairing public perception, but confronting the deeper wounds that remained, particularly among the people most overlooked, the support staff. Although Rachel had successfully removed toxic executives like Liam Carter and Monica Hayes, and had taken meaningful steps to rebuild the culture from within, the scars of mistreatment ran deep. Many employees, especially janitorial workers, administrative assistants, and mailroom staff, still walked with their shoulders hunched, still flinched at raised voices, and still hesitated to speak up. Rachel knew why. Change on paper didn't always translate into belief. So she decided it was time to do something bold. One Monday morning, she stood at the front of the building before the workday began and greeted every employee as they walked in. Not just the executives, but everyone. Janitors. IT techs. Mail clerks. Interns. She shook hands, offered warm good mornings, and thanked them for their work. It caused quite a stir. Executives, caught off guard, began to arrive earlier to avoid being the last to greet the boss. A few looked uncomfortable. But others began to mirror her behavior, offering greetings to team members they'd previously ignored. The following week, Rachel announced something unexpected, a one-week role rotation pilot, where upper management would shadow a support staff role for at least one full shift. "This isn't a punishment," she explained in the email memo. "It's a learning opportunity. To rebuild trust, we have to walk in each other's shoes, even if just for a day." The reactions were mixed. Some executives welcomed the challenge. Others balked. But Rachel made it clear, participation wasn't optional. Luke Evans was one of the first to volunteer, shadowing a mailroom employee named Ben, a reserved young man who had worked at Greenwood for 6 years. For the entire morning, Luke helped Ben sort inter-office mail, deliver packages floor by floor, and even rode the freight elevator with him. At lunch, Luke admitted, "I didn't know how many flights of stairs you guys take every day." Ben laughed and replied, "Good for the heart." Other managers followed. Some fumbled. Some grew quiet. But one thing was universal: every participant came away with new perspective. One senior associate, Melanie Curtis, shadowed Maria, a night janitor, and later confessed that she'd never realized how exhausting it was to clean up after people who treated the space like they owned it. As part of the program, Rachel took a day herself, returning to the janitorial shift she'd held in secret months earlier. Dressed once again in the navy blue uniform, she joined George and the night crew, emptying trash bins and wiping down glass panels until her lower back ached and her hands were raw. But she didn't complain. When George offered to let her skip the last hallway, she smiled and said, "If I'm going to lead, I have to do the work, too." Later that night, as they stood outside the loading dock, sipping coffee from paper cups, George turned to her. "You really meant it when you said things were changing." Rachel nodded. "We still have a long way to go. But we're walking it, together." As the pilot week ended, Rachel gathered feedback and met with employees from every department. The stories they shared were moving, some funny, some heartbreaking. A few executives admitted that for the first time, they felt guilty for how they'd dismissed support staff in the past. One even broke down during the debrief, recalling how his father had worked as a janitor when he was growing up. But Rachel knew that stories, while powerful, needed structure. So she created the Greenwood Inclusion Initiative, a permanent, cross-departmental committee that would focus on equity, recognition, and workplace dignity. It would oversee hiring practices, advancement opportunities, and even how holiday bonuses were distributed. And, just like the Ethics Council, it would include representatives from every level of the company. Meanwhile, Rachel also began to address a quieter, more personal struggle, one that had been building in her since her return, healing her own sense of betrayal. It wasn't just Liam's harassment or Monica's disdain that had hurt her. It was how easily so many people had accepted it. How few had spoken up. How quickly the culture had slipped away from what she had originally built. Rachel confided in Luke one evening as they walked through Embarcadero Center, the soft glow of street lamps stretching their shadows on the pavement. "I keep wondering if I waited too long," she said. "If I let things fall too far." Luke shook his head. "You stepped away to take care of yourself, Rachel. That wasn't a weakness, it was wisdom. What matters is that you came back. And you didn't just fix it, you owned it. She smiled, grateful. But the ache lingered. In an effort to find peace, Rachel returned to the East Bay one weekend and visited the small co-working space where Greenwood had first been born. It was now a yoga studio, but the receptionist let her look around. The worn wooden floors, the old brick walls, it all came rushing back. The long nights. The failed pitches. The first client who finally said yes. She stood quietly in the corner where her husband used to set up his laptop. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't bitter. They were full of memory. Of growth. Of purpose rediscovered. Back at Greenwood, momentum continued to build. Clients who had paused contracts during the leadership transition resumed work. New partnerships formed. The press, once skeptical, began celebrating Greenwood as a case study in ethical recovery. One headline read, "From Janitor to Justice, How Rachel Evans Rebuilt a Company with Heart." But even as the spotlight returned, Rachel remained grounded. She continued walking the halls, still stopped by employees eager to share updates or ideas. She hosted Friday morning coffee chats, where topics ranged from childcare struggles to local volunteer opportunities. She kept her door open, literally and figuratively. And yet, not everything was smooth. The tech department faced delays on a new internal platform. One regional client filed a complaint about project turnaround times. And during a quarterly review, Rachel realized that profits had dipped slightly due to increased spending on new programs and severance packages. Luke presented the numbers frankly. "We're still strong, but we're tighter than we've been in years." Rachel studied the figures, her brow furrowed. "Can we sustain this path?" "Yes," Luke said, "but we'll need to be smart. No waste. No bloat. Every initiative needs purpose." Rachel nodded. "Then let's lead with purpose." She scheduled a company-wide meeting and shared the financial update honestly, no sugarcoating. But instead of panic, the room responded with resolve. Employees offered cost-saving ideas. Departments volunteered to scale back non-essential spending. And Rachel promised that no jobs would be cut unless absolutely necessary. "We're not just surviving," she told them. "We're rebuilding the right way. And that takes time, and sacrifice. But it's worth it." The room erupted in applause. That night, as Rachel looked out over the city from her office, the lights of San Francisco blinking like stars, she felt a rare kind of peace. Not the kind that came from success or profit, but from clarity. She was doing what she was meant to do, leading not with fear, but with faith. Faith in her people. Faith in the work. And most of all, faith in the idea that even a broken culture can be healed with the right hands. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jasmine Rivera, the project manager who'd been mentoring interns. "Thank you for seeing us. For really seeing us. Greenwood feels like home again." Rachel smiled. Yes. It was home again. And this time, it would stay that way. By the time summer rolled into San Francisco, Greenwood and Associates had transformed from a fractured powerhouse into a company pulsing with integrity and clarity of purpose. Under Rachel Evans's leadership, the culture had shifted dramatically, empathy and accountability had replaced fear and favoritism, and employees across all levels felt a renewed sense of ownership. But as with any meaningful transformation, the true test wasn't in what Rachel had already changed, it was in how the company would withstand its next storm. That storm arrived quietly, as most real threats do. It began with a client, a mid-sized biotech firm from Seattle called Genevanta Solutions, who approached Greenwood with an urgent and confidential consulting request. They needed a complete reorganization of their executive team after a whistleblower exposed internal misconduct. Given Greenwood's newly earned reputation for ethics and cultural reform, Genevanta wanted Rachel's firm to guide the transition. Rachel agreed, assigning a hand-picked team of senior consultants, including Jasmine Rivera, to the project. It was a high-profile engagement, and it meant one thing very clearly: Greenwood was being watched. The first few weeks went smoothly. The Genevanta leadership team, shaken and under scrutiny, followed every recommendation Greenwood gave them. Jasmine, now a respected leader at the firm, reported that morale was low but manageable. Rachel scheduled weekly check-ins and even flew up to Seattle to meet the Genevanta board personally. It was during one of those visits that Rachel first encountered Alexander Bray, a Genevanta board member known for his charisma and a history of hands-on leadership. Alexander had been polite, even charming, during their introduction. But there was something about the way he looked at Jasmine that made Rachel pause. It was too familiar, too reminiscent of the way Liam Carter used to scan a room, like every person was a puzzle to be picked apart and manipulated. Rachel didn't say anything at first. Jasmine didn't mention anything either. But during the next strategy session, Rachel noticed Jasmine seemed unusually quiet. When Rachel later asked her if everything was okay, Jasmine simply said, "Just tired. It's been a long week." Still, Rachel trusted her instincts. Back at Greenwood, she pulled Luke into her office. "I think we need to keep a closer eye on Genevanta," she said. "Not just on the deliverables. On the people." Luke nodded slowly. "You think they brought us in just to clean up optics?" "I think they're expecting us to help them sweep everything under the rug," Rachel replied. "But that's not what we do." Later that week, Jasmine requested a one-on-one meeting with Rachel. She closed the door behind her, sat down slowly, and folded her hands in her lap. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, "but I need you to know. Alexander Bray, he's crossed a line." Rachel leaned forward, silent but alert. "At first it was just subtle things," Jasmine continued. "Too many compliments. Standing too close. But then last week, he invited me to dinner, alone, and when I declined, he made it clear my cooperation would influence how much Genevanta would pay us moving forward." Rachel felt a familiar fury rise in her chest. She took a slow breath, then looked Jasmine in the eye. "You did the right thing coming to me. And we're going to handle this carefully, but thoroughly." This time, Rachel wasn't just cleaning up her own company's mess. She was stepping into the middle of another corporation's internal rot, and doing so in full view of clients, competitors, and the media. She immediately pulled Greenwood's legal counsel into a meeting, along with the ethics counsel and Luke. They drafted a formal complaint and submitted it to Genevanta's board, complete with Jasmine's testimony and supporting documentation, including a voice memo Jasmine had recorded after one of Alexander's inappropriate remarks. Genevanta's initial response was slow and defensive. A company spokesperson requested Rachel reconsider the implications of this complaint in light of their business relationship. That was all Rachel needed to hear. She flew back to Seattle within 24 hours, walked straight into the Genevanta boardroom, and delivered her message personally. "If your board believes that covering up harassment is worth preserving a contract," she said calmly, "then Greenwood is no longer the partner you need." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. One tried to interject, but Rachel raised a hand. "Greenwood doesn't negotiate with silence," she said. "And we don't allow predators to hide behind closed doors, not anymore." The silence in the room was suffocating. But the chairman, an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes, finally cleared his throat. "You have our attention, Ms. Evans." Within days, Genevanta placed Alexander Bray on indefinite administrative leave pending a third-party investigation. They publicly acknowledged the complaint and committed to implementing their own internal reforms, with Greenwood's oversight. Jasmine's courage, coupled with Rachel's refusal to waver, had created another ripple, this time outside the walls of their own firm. Back in San Francisco, Rachel gathered her staff for an internal town hall. "Some people might say we overstepped," she told the gathered employees. "That we should have protected the contract or handled things quietly. But Greenwood doesn't sacrifice people for profit." Applause broke out around the room, swelling into a standing ovation. "We stand for something," she continued. "And when you stand for something, You will always face pressure to bend. But we will not bend. That moment marked a shift in Greenwood's identity, not just internally, but across the industry. Requests began pouring in from other companies struggling with culture issues. Greenwood wasn't just a consultancy anymore. It had become a symbol. Jasmine, though still shaken, began to reclaim her power. She was soon offered a leadership role in the Greenwood Inclusion Initiative and accepted it with grace and resolve. Rachel took her out for lunch one afternoon, and over sandwiches at a quiet cafe, they reflected on the past few months. "You've changed this place," Jasmine said, smiling. Rachel shook her head. "We've changed it. Together." But Rachel also knew that visibility came with risk. Greenwood was now on the radar of people who didn't share its values. Competitors who had once dismissed them as too soft were now scrambling to match their impact, or to find cracks in their foundation. So Rachel doubled down on her commitment to transparency. She opened quarterly budget reviews to all staff, introduced regular anonymous feedback sessions, and created an internal newsletter highlighting both successes and areas for growth. Greenwood's integrity, she knew, had to be a living practice, not just a mission statement. One Friday afternoon, as she walked through the lobby, Rachel spotted George, the longtime janitor, laughing with a group of interns. They were swapping stories, passing around a box of homemade cookies someone's grandmother had mailed. It was a simple moment. Unplanned. Unpolished. But to Rachel, it was everything. This was the Greenwood she had always dreamed of. Not perfect. Not immune to hardship. But honest. And united. Later that evening, as she turned off the lights in her office, Rachel paused by the window. The skyline shimmered with the pinks and golds of a Bay Area sunset. She thought of everything it had taken to get here, the betrayal, the confrontation, the painful rebuilding, and she knew more trials would come. But she also knew this: Greenwood and Associates was no longer just a company. It was a community. A standard. A promise. And Rachel Evans would never let it fall again. As autumn approached and the leaves in the Bay Area turned gold and amber, Greenwood and Associates entered a new chapter, one Rachel Evans had both hoped for and quietly prepared herself to face. After months of cultural transformation, high-stakes confrontations, and redefining corporate values from the ground up, the firm had become a beacon of ethical leadership. But with growth came pressure, and Rachel knew that sustaining Greenwood's success would require more than policy and passion. It would require a new kind of structure. Despite the company's skyrocketing reputation, the recent expansion into national markets and multiple large-scale partnerships had pushed Greenwood's infrastructure to its limit. Departments were growing quickly, junior employees were being promoted faster than usual, and leadership roles that once took years to fill were now being filled in months. The demand for consulting services had doubled, and Rachel could sense the strain in the air. The team was doing their best, but they were tired. Even Luke had mentioned needing to restructure how the executive office handled overflow projects. One late evening, as Rachel sat reviewing department reports, she felt it herself: the weight of sustainability. The programs she had introduced, like Ground Floor Fridays, the Inclusion Initiative, and the Ethics Council, had all flourished, but managing them on top of operations, client engagements, and new business development had begun to stretch her leadership team thin. Something had to evolve. So Rachel did what she had always done in times of pressure: she listened. She began by meeting with senior managers one-on-one. Some, like Jasmine Rivera, were candid about their concern. "We're holding the line," Jasmine said, "but we need deeper leadership. The newer hires are eager, but they lack guidance. Some teams are adrift." Rachel nodded. She'd heard the same from HR and the strategic operations team. The firm had matured overnight, and it was time to create a more resilient backbone. At the next executive retreat, held at a modest lodge just outside Napa, Rachel laid out her vision for Greenwood's next phase. "We've built something powerful," she began, standing in front of a fireplace crackling with late October flames. "But now it's time to root that power in consistency. In mentorship. In shared leadership. Her proposal was bold, the creation of a new internal leadership academy, the Greenwood Institute, designed to identify, train, and develop emerging leaders across all departments. The idea wasn't to create a class of future executives focused on climbing the ladder, but to cultivate servant leaders, people who embodied Greenwood's values and could lead with integrity at every level. The room went quiet for a moment. Then Luke raised his glass. "To the next generation," he said. The Greenwood Institute launched within a month. Employees were invited to apply, not based on tenure or title, but on character and contribution. Applications poured in. More than 120 staff members expressed interest. Ultimately, a cohort of 30 was selected to participate in the first cycle, a diverse group that included analysts, assistants, IT technicians, and client managers. Rachel personally mentored the group once a week. She invited guest speakers, leaders from nonprofits, former clients, even retired teachers, to share wisdom not often taught in corporate seminars: how to listen deeply, how to make decisions with conscience, how to lead without ego. Sessions were honest, vulnerable, and transformative. One participant, Michael Tran, a 27-year-old compliance officer, broke down during a group session. "I always thought leadership was about knowing everything," he confessed. "But now I see it's about learning how to carry people with you." The cohort's impact was immediate. Back in their departments, they led conflict resolution sessions, created peer mentorship programs, and helped onboard new hires. They became quiet culture carriers, rooting Greenwood's values in everyday actions. Rachel watched their growth with pride but also with a growing awareness of her own future. It was Luke who first broached the topic over lunch at their usual spot, the Daily Bean, a cozy cafe tucked off Market Street. "Have you thought about what comes next for you?" he asked gently, stirring his coffee. Rachel looked at him, surprised. "Next? You've done more than rebuild this place, Rachel. You've redefined it. But I can see it in your eyes, you're thinking about legacy now." She didn't answer right away. She thought back to that first day, when she walked in as a janitor, unseen and underestimated. So much had changed. And yet, the work of building something lasting, something that could outlive any one leader, was just beginning. That evening, Rachel sat in her office well past sunset. The city lights blinked outside, and the quiet hum of the building surrounded her. She pulled open a drawer and found an old photo, a younger version of herself and her late husband, standing outside the original Greenwood office in Oakland. He had his arm around her, eyes shining with pride. She traced the edge of the frame with her finger. "Maybe it's time," she whispered. The next week, Rachel convened a special board meeting. Luke, Jasmine, and several senior leaders were present. Rachel stood before them and took a deep breath. "I'm not stepping away," she said. "But I am stepping back." The room went still. "I want to spend the next year preparing Greenwood for the next 20 years, she continued. "That means letting others lead. That means trusting the team we've built. And that means focusing my energy on the Institute, on strategy, and on mentorship, not the daily grind." Some looked stunned. Others nodded with quiet understanding. "I've given this company everything I have," Rachel said. "And now it's time to give it room to grow without me at the center." Luke stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've earned that, Rachel. And then some." Jasmine smiled through tears. "It won't be the same without your footsteps in the hallway every morning." Rachel chuckled. "I'll still be around. Just not everywhere, all the time." Over the following months, Rachel transitioned daily responsibilities to a new chief operating officer, selected from within the Greenwood Institute's inaugural class, none other than Jasmine Rivera. Her promotion was met with overwhelming support. Employees cheered when the announcement was made in the main lobby. Jasmine's journey, from mentor, to survivor, to leader, had inspired the entire organization. Rachel remained heavily involved, focusing on shaping the institute into a national model. She was invited to speak at conferences, contribute to academic papers on ethical leadership, and even consulted for other firms struggling to replicate Greenwood's success. But she never lost touch with the core of what made the company special. On her slow days, she still visited departments unannounced, still brought baked goods to the overnight crew, still offered quiet encouragement to the interns trying to find their place. She was still Rachel Evans, the founder, the guardian, the soul of Greenwood. And Greenwood, in turn, flourished. Revenues climbed steadily, staff retention hit record highs, and the firm was featured in Harvard Business Review as one of the top 10 most ethical companies to work for in the United States. But perhaps the greatest indicator of success came not in headlines or numbers, but in the way people treated one another. People listened more. They collaborated more. They led from within. And when Rachel quietly took a week off, her first real vacation in years, no one panicked. No fires erupted. The company didn't wobble. It thrived. As she sat on a porch in Mendocino, watching waves crash against the Northern California cliffs, Rachel sipped her tea and opened an email from George, the janitor-turned-wellness ambassador. It read, "Thanks to you, Greenwood isn't just where I work. It's where I belong." Rachel smiled. This was legacy, not carved into plaques or etched into walls, but living in the hearts of the people who carried the mission forward. And for the first time in a long time, she leaned back, closed her eyes, and simply breathed. The following spring brought a rare kind of clarity to Greenwood and Associates, one born not from crisis or reform, but from purpose. With Jasmine Rivera now serving as Chief Operating Officer, and Rachel Evans guiding the Greenwood Institute and strategic vision, the firm had never been more stable. What had begun as a quiet return under disguise had blossomed into a full-scale transformation. And yet, Rachel knew the work wasn't finished. Not really. As she walked the halls one morning, clipboard in hand and a quiet smile on her face, she paused outside the break room. Laughter spilled into the hallway, two interns teasing George about his new wellness column in the internal newsletter. A year ago, that kind of ease between departments would have been unimaginable. Now, it was normal. Still, beneath the success and structure, Rachel had begun contemplating Greenwood's role beyond its own walls. "We've built the kind of company we once dreamed of," she told Luke during a walk around the Embarcadero one afternoon. "But what if we could help others do the same?" Luke nodded slowly. "You mean beyond our clients?" "I mean beyond consulting altogether," Rachel said. "What if Greenwood could help shape the next generation of ethical companies, by design?" What followed was a 6-month internal think tank, composed of Greenwood Institute alumni, external thought leaders, educators, and community organizers. They met in a repurposed conference room once used for corporate sales reviews, now adorned with sketches, whiteboards, and handwritten ideas taped to the walls. The goal? To launch a social impact division, a dedicated arm of Greenwood and Associates focused entirely on working with public schools, small businesses, and nonprofits to embed ethical leadership practices into their organizations from day one. It was ambitious. Risky. And, as Rachel freely admitted in the planning meetings, not immediately profitable. But it was right. They named the initiative GreensPark. The idea was simple: offer pro bono consulting, resource sharing, and training to organizations doing meaningful work in underserved communities. From school boards struggling with governance issues, to food co-ops navigating expansion, GreensPark would support mission-driven work that couldn't afford traditional corporate consulting. As word of the initiative began to spread, applications poured in. One early applicant stood out: a high school in Oakland that had lost 2 principals in 3 years and was struggling with staff turnover, low morale, and a deeply fractured relationship between teachers and administration. Rachel read the application twice, her heart tightening at the lines written by a group of students who helped submit it. "We just want our school to feel safe and respected, like a place where we matter." GreensPark's first official project was born. Jasmine personally led the outreach team, supported by 2 junior analysts and a program specialist from the Greenwood Institute. Over the course of 3 months, they met with students, teachers, parents, and board members. They didn't come with pre-written solutions, they listened. The process wasn't smooth. There were tense meetings. Deep-rooted mistrust. Heated town halls. But slowly, with steady presence and honest dialogue, trust began to grow. Jasmine facilitated leadership workshops for the school's administration. The analysts created new communication systems between teachers and parents. Rachel even made a surprise visit to speak with students during a Friday assembly. "You matter," she told them. "Not just because you'll grow into something someday, but because you are already someone right now." The auditorium went quiet, except for the occasional rustle of backpacks. And then came a slow, growing applause. After 6 months, the school had not only stabilized, it had begun to flourish. Applications for new teachers doubled. Student council meetings were packed. One young woman, Alea Thomas, even started a podcast with the school's new principal about building respect across generations. Greenwood's internal newsletter highlighted the project with a simple headline: "Change doesn't scale, it ripples." The Greens Park team began fielding requests from across the country: tribal governments in New Mexico, a community clinic in Detroit, a refugee support center in Portland. Each one was different. Each one mattered. Meanwhile, within Greenwood itself, Rachel noticed a shift that filled her with quiet pride. Her own presence was no longer required to maintain momentum. Her leadership had become a philosophy, not a dependency. That realization struck her one day as she stepped into the Greenwood lobby and saw a new intern giving a tour to a group of high school students visiting from Oakland. "This," the intern said, pointing to a framed photo of the company's core values, "isn't just for show. We actually live this stuff here." Rachel didn't interrupt. She simply watched. The ripple was real. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the bay, Rachel returned to her office and found a letter on her desk. No envelope. Just a folded page with neat handwriting. "Dear Ms. Evans. You don't know me, but I'm one of the students from Oakland High. I sat in the back during your speech and didn't say anything. I've never liked adults much. But something about how you looked at us, like we weren't broken, stuck with me. I want to be like you someday. Not a CEO or anything. Just someone who sees people. So I started a club called The Table, where we make sure no one eats lunch alone. We meet every Tuesday. Thanks for changing my school. And for seeing us. Alea." Rachel read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer where she kept the photo of her and her husband, taken in front of that tiny office in Oakland so many years ago. Legacy wasn't a word she used lightly. But in that moment, she understood it more deeply than ever. It wasn't about buildings or titles or balance sheets. It was about ripples. About the way change could start with one invisible janitor in a navy blue uniform and end with a high school girl starting a lunch club so no one felt alone. As spring turned to summer, and the city buzzed with its usual hum, Greenwood and Associates stood not only as a success story, but as a symbol. Not of perfection, but of perseverance. Of people over profit. Of work that mattered. And at the heart of it all stood Rachel Evans. Still listening. Still guiding. Still believing in the quiet power of doing the right thing. Even when no one was watching. Especially then. The story of Rachel Evans reminds us that true leadership isn't about power or titles, it's about courage, humility, and the willingness to do the right thing even when no one's watching. In a world where it's easy to overlook others or chase quick success, Rachel shows us the strength in slowing down, listening deeply, and building something that lasts. Whether you're running a business, working behind the scenes, or just trying to make your community better, integrity is what sets the foundation for real change. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment about what resonated with you most. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. You're not just supporting the content, you're helping build a community that values kindness, justice, and heart. Let's keep these stories alive, together.